1. Whenever Henry Wilt took the dog for a walk, or to be more accurate, when the dog took him, or to be exact, when Mrs. Wilt told them both to go and take themselves out of the house so that she could do her yoga exercises, he always took the same route. In fact, the dog followed the route, and Wilt followed the dog. They went down past the post office, across the playground, under the railway bridge, and out onto the footpath by the river. A mile along the river, and then under the railway line again, and back through streets where the houses were bigger than Wilt's semi, and where there were large trees and gardens, and the cars were all Rovers and Mercedes. It was here that Clem, a pedigree Labrador, evidently feeling more at home, did his business, while Wilt stood looking around rather uneasily, conscious that this was not his sort of neighbourhood, and wishing it was. It was about the only time during their walk that he was at all aware of his surroundings. For the rest of the way, Wilt's walk was an interior one, and followed an itinerary completely at variance with his own appearance and that of his route. It was, in fact, a journey of wishful thinking, a pilgrimage along trails of remote possibility, involving the irrevocable disappearance of Mrs. Wilt, the sudden acquisition of wealth, power, what he would do if he was appointed Minister of Education, or better still, Prime Minister. It was partly concocted of a series of desperate expedients, and partly in an unspoken dialogue, so that anyone noticing Wilt, and most people didn't, might have seen his lips move occasionally, and his mouth curl into what he fondly imagined was a sardonic smile, as he dealt with questions or parried arguments with devastating repartee. It was on one of these walks, taken in the rain, after a particularly trying day at the Tech, that Wilt first conceived the notion that he would only be able to fulfil his latent promise and call his life his own if some not entirely fortuitous disaster overtook his wife. Like everything else in Henry Wilt's life, it was not a sudden decision. He was not a decisive man. 10 years as an assistant lecturer, grade 2, at the Fenland College of Arts and Technology was proof of that. For 10 years he'd remained in the Liberal Studies Department, teaching classes of gasfitters, plasterers, bricklayers and plumbers, or keeping them quiet. And for 10 long years he'd spent his days going from classroom to classroom with 24 copies of Sons and Lovers, or Orwell's Essays, or Candide, or Lord of the Flies, and had done his damnedest to extend the sensibilities of day-release apprentices, with notable lack of success. Exposure to culture, Mr. Morris, the head of Liberal Studies, called it. But from Wilt's point of view, it looked more like his own exposure to barbarism. And certainly the experience had undermined the ideals and illusions which had sustained him in his younger days. So had 12 years of marriage to Eva. If gasfitters could go through life wholly impervious to the emotional significance of the interpersonal relationships portrayed in Sons and Lovers, and coarsely amused by D.H. Lawrence's profound insight into the sexual nature of existence, Eva Wilt was incapable of such detachment. She hurled herself into cultural activities and self-improvement with an enthusiasm that tormented Wilt. Worse still, her notion of culture varied from week to week, sometimes embracing Barbara Cartland and Anya Seton, sometimes Ouspensky, sometimes Kenneth Clark, but more often the instructor at the pottery classes on Tuesdays, or the lecturer on transcendental meditation on Thursdays, so that Wilt never knew what he was coming home to, except a hastily cooked supper, some forcibly expressed opinions about his lack of ambition, and a half-baked intellectual eclecticism that left him disoriented. To escape from the memory of gasfitters as putative human beings, and of Eva in the lotus position, Wilt walked by the river thinking dark thoughts, made darker still by the knowledge that for the 5th year running his application to be promoted to senior lecturer was almost certain to be turned down, and that unless he did something soon, he'd be doomed to gasfitters 3 and plasterers 2, and to Eva for the rest of his life. It was not a prospect to be borne. He would act decisively. Above his head, a train thundered by. Wilt stood watching its dwindling lights and thought about accidents involving level crossings. "He's in such a funny state these days," said Eva Wilt. "I don't know what to make of him." "I've given up trying with Patrick," said Mavis Mottram, studying Eva's vase critically. I think I'll put the loop in just a fraction of an inch to the left. Then it'll help to emphasize the oratorical qualities of the rose. Now the iris over here. One must try to achieve an almost audible effect of contrasting colours. Contrapuntal, one might say. Eve nodded and sighed. He used to be so energetic, she said. But now he just sits about the house watching telly. It's as much as I can do to get him to take the dog for a walk. Oh, he probably misses the children, said Mavis. I know Patrick does. That's because he has some to miss, said Eva Wilt bitterly. Henry can't even whip up the energy to have any. Oh, I'm so sorry, Eva, I forgot, said Mavis, adjusting the loop-in so that it clashed more significantly with the geranium. Well, there's no need to be sorry, said Eva, who didn't number self-pity among her failings. I suppose I should be grateful. I mean, imagine having children like Henry. It's so uncreative. Well, besides, children are so tiresome, they take up all one's creative energy. Mavis Mottram moved away to help someone else to achieve a contrapuntal effect, this time with nasturtiums and hollyhocks in a cerise bowl. Eva fiddled with her rose. Mavis was so lucky. She had Patrick, and Patrick Mottram was such an energetic man. Eva, in spite of her size, placed great emphasis on energy and creativity, so that even quite sensible people who were not unduly impressionable found themselves exhausted after 10 minutes in her company. In the lotus position at her yoga class, she managed to exude energy, and her attempts at transcendental meditation had been likened to a pressure cooker on simmer. And with creative energy there came enthusiasms. The febrile enthusiasms of the evidently unfulfilled woman for whom each new idea heralds the dawn of a new day, and vice versa. Since the ideas she espoused were either trite or incomprehensible to her, her attachment to them was correspondingly brief, and did nothing to fill the gap left in her life by Henry Wilt's lack of attainment. While he lived a violent life in his imagination, Eva, lacking any imagination at all, lived violently in fact. She threw herself into things, situations, new friends, groups and happenings with a reckless abandon that concealed the fact that she lacked the emotional stamina to stay for more than a moment. Now, as she backed away from her vase, she bumped into someone behind her. "I beg your pardon," she said, and turned to find herself looking into a pair of dark eyes. "No need to apologize," said the woman in an American accent. She was slight and dressed with a simple scruffiness that was beyond Eva Wilt's moderate income. "I'm Eva Wilt," said Eva, who had once attended a class on getting to know people at the Oakrington Village College. "My husband lectures at the Tech, and we live at 34 Parkview Avenue." "Sally Pringsheim," said the woman with a smile. "We're in Rossiter Grove. We're over on a sabbatical. Gaskell's a biochemist." Eva Wilt accepted the distinctions and congratulated herself on her perspicacity about the blue jeans and the sweater. People who lived in Rossiter Grove were a cut above Parkview Avenue, and husbands who were biochemists on sabbatical were also in the university. Eva's world was made up of such nuances. "You know, I'm not at all sure I could live with an oratorical rose," said Sally Pringsheim. "Symphonies are okay in auditoriums, but I can do without them in vases." Eva stared at her with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. To be openly critical of Mavis Mottram's flower arrangements was to utter blasphemy in Parkview Avenue. "You know, I've always wanted to say that," she said with a sudden surge of warmth, "but I've never had the courage." Sally Pringsheim smiled. "I think one should always say what one thinks. Truth is so essential in any really meaningful relationship. I always tell G-Baby exactly what I'm thinking." "G-Baby?" said Eva Wilt. "Gaskell's my husband," said Sally. "Not that he's really a husband. It's just that we got this open-ended arrangement for living together. Sure, we're legal and all that, but I think it's important sexually to keep one's options open, don't you?" By the time Eva got home, her vocabulary had come to include several new words. She found Wilt in bed, pretending to be asleep, and woke him up and told him about Sally Pringsheim. Wilt turned over and tried to go back to sleep, wishing to God she'd stuck to her contrapuntal flower arrangements. Sexually open-ended, freewheeling options were the last thing he wanted just now. And coming from the wife of a biochemist who could afford to live in Rossiter Grove, didn't augur well for the future. Eva Wilt was too easily influenced by wealth, intellectual status, and new acquaintances to be allowed out with a woman who believed that clitoral stimulation, oral-wise, was a concomitant part of a fully emancipated relationship and that unisex was here to stay. Wilt had enough troubles with his own virility without having Eva demand that her conjugal rights be supplemented oral-wise. He spent a restless night thinking dark thoughts about accidental deaths involving fast trains, level crossings, their Ford Escort, and Eva's seatbelt, and got up early and made himself breakfast. He was just going off to a 9 o'clock lecture to Motor Mechanics 3 when Eva came downstairs with a dreamy look on her face. "I've just remembered something I wanted to ask you last night," she said. "What does transsexual diversification mean?" "Writing poems about queers," said Wilt hastily and went out to the car. He drove down Parkview Avenue and got stuck in a traffic jam at the roundabout. He sat and cursed silently. He was 34, and his talents were being dissipated on MM3 and a woman who was clearly educationally subnormal. Worst of all, he had to recognize the truth of Eva's constant criticism that he wasn't a man. "If you were a proper man," she was always saying, "you'd show more initiative. You've got to assert yourself." Wilt asserted himself at the roundabout and got into an altercation with a man in a minibus. As usual, he came off second best. "The problem with Wilt, as I see it, is that he lacks drive," said the head of English, himself a nerveless man with a tendency to see and solve problems with a degree of equivocation that made good his natural lack of authority. The promotions committee nodded its joint head for the 5th year running. "Well, he may lack drive, but he is committed," said Mr. Morris, fighting his annual rearguard on Wilt's behalf. "Committed?" said the head of catering with a snort. "Committed to what? Abortion, Marxism, or promiscuity? It's bound to be one of the three. I've yet to come across a liberal studies lecturer who wasn't a crank, a pervert, or a red-hot revolutionary, and a good many have been all three." "Hear, hear," said the head of mechanical engineering, on whose lathes a demented student had once turned out several pipe bombs. Mr. Morris bristled. "I grant you that one or two lecturers have been a little overzealous politically, but I resent the imputation that... Now let's leave generalities aside and get back to Wilt," said the vice principal. "You were saying that he's committed." "He needs encouragement," said Mr. Morris. "Damn it, the man's been with us 10 years and he's still only grade 2. "That's precisely what I mean about his lacking drive," said the head of English. "If it were worth promoting, he'd have been a senior lecturer by now." "I must say I agree," said the head of geography. "Any man who's content to spend 10 years taking gas fitters and plumbers is clearly unfit to hold an administrative post." "Or do we have to promote solely for administrative reasons?" Mr. Morris asked wearily. "Wilt happens to be a good teacher." "If I may make a point," said Dr. Mayfield, the head of sociology, "at this moment in time, it is vital we bear in mind that, in the light of the forthcoming introduction of the joint honours degree in urban studies and medieval poetry, provisional approval for which degree by the Council of National Academic Awards, I am happy to announce, at least in principle, that we may maintain a viable staff position in regard to senior lectureships by allocating places for candidates with specialist knowledge in particular spheres of academic achievement, rather than... "If I may interrupt for a moment, in or out of time," said Dr. Board, head of modern languages. "Are you saying that we should have senior lectureships for highly qualified specialists who can't teach, rather than promote assistant lecturers without doctorates who can?" "Well, if Dr. Board had allowed me to continue," said Dr. Mayfield, "he would have understood that I was saying—" "I doubt it," said Dr. Board, "quite apart from your syntax." And so for the 5th year running, Wilt's promotion was forgotten. The Fenland College of Arts and Technology was expanding. New degree courses proliferated, and more students with fewer qualifications poured in to be taught by more staff with higher qualifications, until one day the tech would cease to be a mere tech and rise in status to become a poly. It was the dream of every head of department. And in the process, Wilt's self-esteem and the hopes of Eva Wilt were ignored. Wilt heard the news before lunch in the canteen. "I'm sorry, Henry," said Mr. Morris as they lined up with their trays. "It's this wretched economic squeeze. Even modern languages had to take a cut. They only got 2 promotions through." Wilt nodded. It was what he'd come to expect. He was in the wrong department, in the wrong marriage, and in the wrong life. He took his fish fingers across to a table in the corner and ate by himself. Around him, other members of staff sat discussing A-level prospects and who was going to sit on the course board next term. They taught maths or economics or English, subjects that counted, and where promotion was easy. Liberal studies didn't count, and promotion was out of the question. It was as simple as that. Wilt finished his lunch and went up to the reference library to look up insulin in the pharmacopoeia. He had an idea it was the one untraceable poison. At 5 to 2, none the wiser, he went down to room 752 to extend the sensibilities of 15 apprentice butchers, designated on the timetable as Meat 1. As usual, they were late and drunk. "We've been drinking Bill's Elf," they told him, when they drifted in at 2:10. "Really?" said Wilt, handing out copies of The Lord of the Flies. "And how is he?" "Bloody awful," said a large youth with stuff off painted across the back of his leather jacket. "He's puking his guts out. It's his birthday and he's had 4 vodkas and a baby sham." "We'd got to the part where Piggy's in the forest," said Wilt, heading them off the discussion of what Bill had drunk for his birthday. He reached for the board duster and rubbed a drawing of a Dutch cap off the blackboard. "Well, that's Mr. Sedgwick's trademark," said one of the butchers. "He's always going on about contraceptives and things. He's got a thing about them." "A thing about them?" said Wilt loyally. "You know, birth control. Well, he used to be a Catholic, didn't he? No, he's not. He's making up for lost time," said a pale-faced youth unwrapping a Mars bar. "Someone should tell him about the pill," said another youth, lifting his head somnolently from the desk. "You can't feel a thing with the Frenchie. You get more thrill with the pill." "I suppose you do," said Wilt. "But I understood there were side effects." "Depends which side you want it," said a lad with sideburns. Wilt turned back to The Lord of the Flies reluctantly. He'd read the thing 200 times already. "Now, Piggy goes into the forest," he began, only to be stopped by another butcher, who evidently shared his distaste for the misfortunes of Piggy. "You only get bad effects with a pill if you use ones that are high in estrogen." "Well, that's very interesting," said Wilt. "Estrogen? You seem to know a lot about it." "Well, an old girl down our street got a blood clot in her leg." "Silly old clot," said the Mars bar. "Listen," said Wilt. "Either we hear what Peter has to tell us about the effects of the pill, or we get on and read about Piggy." "Fuck Piggy," said the sideburns. "Right," said Wilt heartily. "Then keep quiet." "Well," said Peter, "this old girl, well, she wasn't all that old, maybe 30. She was on the pill and she got this blood clot, and the doctor told my auntie it was the estrogen, and she'd better take a different sort of pill just in case. And the old girl down her street, her old man had to go and have a vasectomy so she wouldn't have another blood clot." "Buggered if anyone's going to get me to have a vasectomy," said the Mars bar. "I want to know I'm all there." "We all have ambitions," said Wilt. "Nobody's going to hack away at my knackers with a bloody great knife," said the sideburns. "Nobody would want to," said someone else. "What about the bloke whose missus you banged?" said Mars bar. "I bet he wouldn't mind having a go." Wilt applied the sanction of Piggy again and got them back onto vasectomy. "Anyway, it's not irreversible anymore," said Peter. "They can put a tiny little gold tap in and you can turn it on when you want a nipper." "Go on, that's not true." "Well, not on the National Health you can't, but you can if you pay for it. I read about it in a magazine. They've been doing experiments in America." "Well, what happens if the washer goes wrong?" asked the Mars bar. "I suppose they call the plumber in." Wilt sat and listened while Meet One ranged far and wide about vasectomy and the coil, and Indians getting free transistors, and the plane that landed at Audley End with a lot of illegal immigrants, and what somebody's brother who was a policeman in Brixton said about blacks, and how the Irish were just as bad, and bombs, and back to Catholics and birth control, and who'd want to live in Ireland where you can't even buy French letters, and so back to the pill. And all the time, his mind filled itself obsessively with ways and means of getting rid of Eva. A diet of birth control pills high on estrogen. If he ground them up and mixed them with the Ovaltine she took at bedtime, there was a chance that she'd develop blood clots all over the place in no time at all. Wilt put the notion out of his head. Eva with blood clots was too awful to stomach, and anyway it might not work. No, it would have to be something quick, certain and painless, preferably an accident. At the end of the hour, Wilt collected the books and made his way back to the staff room. He had a free period. On the way, he passed the site of the new administration block. The ground had been cleared, and the builders had moved in and were boring pile holes for the foundations. Wilt stopped and watched as the drilling machine wound slowly down into the ground. They were making wide holes. Very wide. Big enough for a body. "How deep are you going?" he asked one of the workmen. 30 feet. 30 feet, said Wilt. "When's the concrete going in?" "Monday, any luck?" said the man. Wilt passed on. A new and quite horrible idea had just occurred to him. 2. It was one of Eva Wilt's better days. She had days, better days, and one of those days. Days were just days when nothing went wrong, and she got the washing up done, and the front room vacuumed, and the windows washed, and the beds made, and the bath vimmed, and the lavatory pan harpicked, and went round to the Harmony Community Centre and helped with Xeroxing, or sorted old clothes for the jumble sale, and generally made herself useful, and came home for lunch, and went to the library and had tea with Mavis or Susan or Jean, and talked about life and how seldom Henry made love to her, even perfunctorily, nowadays, and how she'd missed her opportunity by refusing a bank clerk who was a manager now, and came home and made Henry's supper and went out to yoga or flower arrangement or meditation or pottery, and finally climbed into the bed with the feeling that she'd got something done. On one of those days, nothing went right. The activities were exactly the same, but each episode was tainted with some minor disaster, like the fuse blowing on the vacuum cleaner, or the drain in the sink getting blocked with a piece of carrot, so that by the time Henry came home, he was either greeted by silence or subjected to a quite unwarranted exposé of all his faults and shortcomings. On one of those days, Wilt usually took the dog for an extended walk via the ferry path in, and spent a restless night getting up and going to the bathroom, thus nullifying the cleansing qualities of the harpic Eva had puffed round the pan, and providing her with a good excuse to point out his faults once again in the morning. "What the hell am I supposed to do?" he'd asked after one of those nights. "If I pull the chain, you grumble because I've woken you up, and if I don't, you say it looks nasty in the morning." "Well, it does. And in any case, you don't have to wash all the harpic off the sides, and don't say you don't. I've seen you. You aim it all the way round so that it all gets taken off. You do it quite deliberately." "If I pulled the chain, it'd all get flushed off anyway, and you'd get woken up into the bargain," Wilt told her, conscious that he did make a habit of aiming at the harpic. He had a grudge against the stuff. "Why can't you just wait until the morning?" "Well, anyway, it serves you right," she continued, forestalling his obvious answer, "for drinking all that beer. You're supposed to be taking Clem for a walk, not swilling ale in that horrid pub." "To pee or not to pee, that's the question," said Wilt, helping himself to all bran. "What do you expect me to do, tie a knot in the damn thing?" "Wouldn't make any difference to me if you did," said Eva bitterly. "It'll make a hell of a lot of difference to me, thank you very much." "I was talking about our sex life, and you know it." "Oh, that," said Wilt. But that was on one of those days. On one of her better days, something unexpected happened to inject the daily round with a new meaning, and to awake in her those dormant expectations that somehow everything would suddenly change for the better and stay that way. It was on such expectations that her faith in life was based. They were the spiritual equivalent of the trivial activities that kept her busy and Henry subdued. On one of her better days, the sun shone brighter, the floor in the hall gleamed brighter, and Eva Wilt was brighter herself, and hummed "Some Day My Prince Will Come" while hoovering the stairs. On one of her better days, Eva went forth to meet the world with a disarming good-heartedness, and awoke in others the very same expectations that so thrilled her in herself. And on one of her better days, Henry had to get his own supper, and, if he was wise, kept out of the house as long as possible. Eva Wilt's expectations demanded something a sight more invigorating than Henry Wilt after a day at the Tech. It was on the evenings of such days that he came nearest to genuinely deciding to murder her, and to hell with the consequences. On this particular day, she was on her way to the community centre when she ran into Sally Pringsheim. It was one of those entirely fortuitous meetings that resulted from Eva making her way on foot instead of by bicycle, and going through Rossiter Grove instead of straight down Parkview Avenue, which was half a mile shorter. Sally was just driving out of the gate in a Mercedes with a P registration, which meant it was brand new. Eva noted the fact and smiled accordingly. "How funny me running into you like this," she said brightly as Sally stopped the car and unlocked the door. "Can I give you a lift? I'm going into town to look for something casual to wear tonight. Gaskell's got some Swedish professor coming over from Heidelberg, and we're taking him to Martans." Eva Wilt climbed in happily, her mind computing the cost of the car and the house, and the significance of wearing something casual at Martans, where she'd heard that starters like prawn cocktails cost 95p. And the fact that Dr. Pringsheim entertained Swedish professors when they came to Ipford. "I was going to walk to town," she lied. "Henry's taken the car, and it's such a lovely day. Gaskell's bought a bicycle. He says it's quicker and it keeps him fit," said Sally, thus condemning Henry Wilt to yet another misfortune. Eva made a note to see that he bought a bicycle at the police auction and cycled to work in rain or snow. "I was thinking of trying Felicity Fashions for a Shantung poncho. I don't know what they're like, but I've been told they're good. Professor Grant's wife goes there, and she says they have the best selection." "I'm sure they must have," said Eva Wilt, whose patronage of Felicity Fashions had consisted of looking in the window and wondering who on earth could afford dresses at £40. Now she knew. They drove into town and parked in the multi-storey car park. By that time, Eva had stored a lot more information about the Pringsheims in her memory. They came from California. Sally had met Gaskell while hitchhiking through Arizona. She had been to Kansas State, but had dropped out to live on a commune. There had been other men in her life. Gaskell loathed cats. They gave him hay fever. Women's lib meant more than burning your bra. It meant total commitment to the program of women's superiority over men. Love was great if you didn't let it get to you. Compost was in, and colour TV out. Gaskell's father had owned a chain of stores which was sordid. Money was handy, and Rossiter Grove was a bore. Above all, fucking had to be, just had to be fun, whichever way you looked at it. Eva Wilt received this information with a jolt. In her circle, fuck was a word husbands used when they hit their thumbs with hammers. When Eva used it, she did so in the isolation of the bathroom, and with a wistfulness that robbed it of its crudity and imbued it with a splendid virility, so that a good fuck became the most distant and abstract of all her expectations, and quite removed from Henry's occasional early-morning fumblings. And if fuck was reserved for the bathroom, fucking was even more remote. It suggested an almost continuous activity, a familiar occurrence that was both casual and satisfying, and added a new dimension to life. Eva Wilt stumbled out of the car and followed Sally to Felicity Fashions in a state of shock. If fucking was fun, shopping with Sally Pringsheim was a revelation. It was marked by a decisiveness that was truly breathtaking. Where Eva would have hummed and hawed, Sally selected, and having selected, moved on down the racks, discarding things she didn't like, leaving them hanging over chairs, seized others, glanced at them, and said she supposed they would do with a bored acceptance that was infectious, and left the shop with a pile of boxes containing £200 worth of shantung ponchos, silk summer coats, scarves, and blouses. Eva Wilt had spent 70 on a pair of yellow lounging pyjamas and a raincoat with lapels and a belt that Sally said was pure Gatsby. "Now all you need is a hat and you'll be it," she said as they loaded the boxes into the car. They bought the hat, a Trilby, and then had coffee at the Mombasa Coffee House, where Sally leant across the table intensely, smoking a long, thin cigar, and talking about body contact in a loud voice, so that Eva was conscious that the women at several nearby tables had stopped talking and were listening rather disapprovingly. "Gaskell's nipples drive me wild," Sally said. "They drive him wild, too, when I suck them." Eva drank her coffee and wondered what Henry would do if she took it into her head to suck his nipples. Drive him wild was hardly the word, and besides she was beginning to regret having spent £70. That would drive him wild, too. Henry didn't approve of credit cards. But she was enjoying herself too much to let the thought of his reaction spoil her day. "I think tits are so important," Sally went on. Two women at the next table paid their bill and walked out. "I suppose they must be," said Eva Wilt uneasily. "I've never had much use for mine." "Haven't you?" said Sally. "Oh, we'll have to do something about that." "I don't see that there is much anyone can do about it," said Eva. "Henry never takes his pyjamas off, and my nightie gets in the way." "You don't tell me you wear things in bed." "Oh, you poor thing. And nighties. God, how humiliating for you. I mean, it's typical of a male-dominated society, all this costume differentiation. You must be suffering from touch deprivation. Gaskell says it's as bad as a vitamin deficiency." "Well, Henry's always tired when he gets home," Eva told her. "And I go out a lot." "I'm not surprised," said Sally. "Gaskell says male fatigue is a symptom of penile insecurity. Is Henry's big or small?" "Well, it depends," said Eva hoarsely. "Sometimes it's big and sometimes it isn't." "I much prefer men with small ones," said Sally. "They try so much harder." They finished their coffee and went back to the car, discussing Gaskell's penis and his theory that in a sexually undifferentiated society, nipple stimulation would play an increasingly important role in developing the husband's sense of his hermaphroditic nature. "He's written an article on it," Sally said as they drove home. "It's called The Man as Mother. It was published in Suck last year." "Suck?" said Eva. "Yes, it's a journal published by the Society for Undifferentiated Sexual Studies in Kansas. G's done a lot of work for them on animal behavior. He did his theory on role play in rats there." "That sounds very interesting," said Eva uncertainly. Role, R-O-L-L or R-O-L-E. Oh, whichever it was impressive, and certainly Henry's occasional pieces on day-release apprentices and literature in Liberal Studies Quarterly hardly measured up to Dr. Pringsheim's monographs. "Oh, I don't know. It's all so obvious, really. If you put two male rats together in a cage long enough, one of them simply bound to develop active tendencies, and the other passive ones," said Sally wearily. But Gaskell was absolutely furious. He thought they ought to alternate. That's G all over. I told him how silly he was being. I said, "Gee, honey, rats are practically undifferentiated anyway. I mean, how can you expect them to be able to make an existential choice?" And you know what he said? He said, "Pubic baby, rats are the paradigm. Just remember that and you won't go far wrong. Rats are the paradigm." Now, what do you think of that? "I think rats are rather horrid," said Eva without thinking. Sally laughed and put her hand on her knee. "No, Eva, darling," she murmured. "You're so adorably down to earth. No, I'm not taking you back to Parkview Avenue. You're coming home with me for a drink and lunch. I'm simply dying to see you in those lemon loungers." They turned into Rossiter Grove. If rats were a paradigm for Dr. Pringsheim, Printers 3 were a paradigm for Henry Wilt, though of a rather different sort. They represented all that was most difficult, insensitive, and downright bloody-minded about day-release classes. And to make matters worse, the sods thought they were literate because they could actually read, and Voltaire was an idiot because he made everything go wrong for Candide. Coming after nursery nurses and during his stand-in period, Printers 3 brought out the worst in him. They'd obviously brought out the worst in Cecil Williams, who should have been taking him. "It's his second week off he's been sick," they told Wilt. "I'm not at all surprised," said Wilt. "You lot are enough to make anyone sick. Well, he had one bloke wet and gassed himself. Pinkerton his name was. He took us for a term, made us read this book, Jude the Obscure. Wasn't half a depressing book, all about this twit Jude." "I had an idea it was," said Wilt. "Next term old Pinky didn't come back. Went down to the river and stuck a pipe up the exhaust and gassed himself." "Can't say I blame him," said Wilt. "Well, I like that. He was supposed to set us an example." Wilt looked at the class grimly. "I'm sure he had that in mind when he gassed himself," he said. "And now, if you'll just get on and read quietly, eat quietly, and smoke so no one can see you from the admin block, I've got work to do." "Work? You lot don't know what work is. All you do is sit at a desk all day and read. Call that work? Buggered if I do. And they pay you to do it." "Shut up," said Wilt with startling violence. "Shut your stupid trap." "Who's going to make me?" said the printer. Wilt tried to control his temper, and for once found it impossible. There was something incredibly arrogant about Printers 3. "I am," he shouted. "You and who else? You can make a mouse shut its trap, not if you tried all day." Wilt stood up. "You fucking little shit," he shouted. "You dirty, snivelling—" "I must say, Henry, I'd have expected you to show more restraint," said the head of Liberal Studies an hour later, when Wilt's nose had stopped bleeding and the tech sister had put a band-aid on his eyebrow. "I wasn't my class, and they got my goat by gloating about Pinkerton's suicide. If Williams hadn't been off sick, it wouldn't have happened," Wilt explained. "He's always sick when he has to take Printers 3. Mr. Morris shook his head dispiritedly. "I don't care who they were. You simply can't go round assaulting students." "Assaulting students? I never touched—" All right, but you did use offensive language. Bob Fennick was in the next classroom, and he heard you call this Allison fellow a fucking little shit and an evil-minded moron. Is it any wonder he took a poke at you?" "I suppose not," said Wilt. "I shouldn't have lost my temper. I'm sorry." "In that case, we'll just forget it happened," said Mr. Morris. "But just remember, if I'm to get you a senior lectureship, I can't have you blotting your copybook up, having punch-ups with students." "I didn't have a punch-up," said Wilt. "He punched me." "Oh, just let's hope he doesn't go to the police and charge you with assault. That's the last sort of publicity we want." "Just take me off Printers 3, said Wilt. "I had my fill of the brutes."
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the other side of this cassette. Side 2.
He went down the corridor and collected his coat and briefcase from the staff room. His nose felt twice its normal size, and his eyebrow hurt abominably. On his way out to the car park, he passed several other members of staff, but no one stopped to ask him what had happened. Henry Wilt passed unnoticed out of the tech and got into his car. He shut the door and sat for several minutes, watching the pile drivers at work on the new block. Up, down, nails in a coffin. And one day, the inevitable day, he would be in his coffin, still unnoticed, still an assistant lecturer, grade 2, and quite forgotten by everyone except some lout in Printers 3 who would always remember the day he'd punched a liberal studies lecturer on the nose and got away with it. He'd probably boast about it to his grandchildren. Wilt started the car and drove out onto the main road, filled with loathing for Printers 3, the tech, life in general, and himself in particular. He understood now why terrorists were prepared to sacrifice themselves for the good of some cause. Given a bomb and a cause, he would cheerfully have blown himself and any innocent bystanders to kingdom come, just to prove for one glorious, if brief moment, that he was an effective force. But he had neither bomb nor cause. Instead, he drove home recklessly and parked outside 34 Parkview Avenue. Then he unlocked the front door and went inside. There was a strange smell in the hall, some sort of perfume, musky and sweet. He put his briefcase down and looked into the living room. Eva was evidently out. He went into the kitchen and put the kettle on and felt his nose. He'd have a good look at it in the bathroom mirror. He was halfway upstairs and conscious that there was a positively miasmic quality about the perfume when he was brought to a halt. Eva Wilt stood in the bedroom doorway in a pair of astonishingly yellow pyjamas with enormous flared trousers. She looked quite hideous. And to make matters worse, she was smoking a long, thin cigarette in a long, thin holder, and her mouth was a brilliant red. "Penis, baby," she muttered hoarsely and swayed. "Come in here. I'm going to suck your nipples till you cum me oral-wise." Wilt turned and fled downstairs. The bitch was drunk. It was one of her better days. Without waiting to turn the kettle off, Henry Wilt went out the front door and got back into the car. He wasn't staying round to have her suck his nipples. He'd had all he could take for one day. 3. Eva Wilt went downstairs and looked for Penis Baby half-heartedly. For one thing, she didn't want to find him, and for another, she didn't feel like sucking his nipples, and for a third, she knew she shouldn't have spent £70 on a raincoat and a pair of beach pyjamas she could have got for 30 at Bloden's. She didn't need them, and she could see herself walking down Parkview Avenue, looking like the Great Gatsby. Besides, she felt a bit sick. Still, he'd left the kettle on, so he must be somewhere. It wasn't like Henry to go out and leave the kettle on. She looked in the lounge. It had been the sitting room until lunchtime, when Sally called her sitting room a lounge. She looked in the dining room, now the diner, and even in the garden. But Henry had vanished, taking with him the car and her hopes that nipple-sucking would bring new meaning to their marriage and put an end to her body contact deprivation. Finally, she gave up the search and made herself a nice pot of tea and sat in the kitchen, wondering what on earth had induced her to marry a male chauvinistic pig like Henry Wilt, who wouldn't have known a good fuck if it had been handed to him on a plate, and whose idea of a sophisticated evening was a boneless chicken curry at the New Delhi and a performance of King Lear at the Guildhall. Why couldn't she have married someone like Gaskell Pringsheim, who entertained Swedish professors at Martont and who understood the importance of clitoral stimulation as a necessary con something or other of a truly satisfying interpersonal penetration? Other people still found her attractive. Patrick Mottram did, and so did John Frost, who taught her pottery. And Sally had said she was lovely. Eva sat staring into space, the space between the washing-up rack and the Kenwood mixer Henry had given her for Christmas, and thought about Sally and how she'd looked at her so strangely when she was changing into her lemon loungers. Sally had stood in the doorway of the Pringsheim's bedroom, smoking a cigar and watching her movements with a sensual calculation that had made Eva blush. "Darling, you have such a lovely body," she'd said, as Eva turned hurriedly and scrambled into the trousers to avoid revealing the hole in her panties. "You mustn't let it go to waste." "Do you really think they suit me?" But Sally had been staring at her breasts intently. "Booby baby," she murmured. Eva Wilt's breasts were prominent, and Henry, in one of his many often moments, had once said something about the dugs of hell going ding-a-ling-a-ling for you but not for me. Sally was more appreciative, and had insisted that Eva remove her bra and burn it. They had gone down to the kitchen and had drunk tequila, and had put the bra on a dish with a sprig of holly on it, and Sally had poured brandy over it and had set it alight. They had to carry the dish out into the garden because it smelt so horrible and smoked so much, and they'd lain on the grass, laughing as it smouldered. Looking back on the episode, Eva regretted her action. It had been a good bra, with double-stretch panels designed to give confidence where a woman needs it, as the TV adverts put it. Still, Sally said that she owed it to herself as a free woman, and with 2 drinks inside her, Eva was in no mood to argue. "You've got to feel free," Sally had said. "Free to be. Free to be." "Free to be what?" said Eva. "Yourself, darling," Sally whispered. "Your secret self." And had touched her tenderly, where Eva Wilt, had she been sober and less elated, would staunchly have denied having a self. They had gone back into the house and had lunch, a mixture of more tequila, salad and rye vita and cottage cheese, which Eva, whose appetite for food was almost as omnivorous as her enthusiasm for new experiences, found unsatisfying. She had hinted as much, but Sally had pooh-poohed the idea of 3 good meals a day. "It's not good, calorie-wise, to have such a high starch intake," she said. "And besides, it's not how much you put into yourself, but what. Sex and food, honey, are much the same. A little, a lot is better than a lot, a little." She'd poured Eva another tequila, insisted she take a bite of lemon before knocking it back, and had helped her upstairs to the big bedroom with the big bed and the big mirror on the ceiling. "It's time for tea, she said, adjusting the slats of the Venetian blind. Tea, Eva mumbled. "But we've just had din-din." "Touch therapy, darling," said Sally, and pushed her gently back onto the bed. Eva Wilt stared up at her reflection in the mirror. A large woman, 2 large women, in yellow pyjamas, lying on a large bed, a large crimson bed. 2 large women without yellow pyjamas, on a large crimson bed. 4 women, naked, on a large crimson bed. "Oh, Sally! No, Sally!" "Darling," said Sally, and silenced her protest oral-wise. It had been a startlingly new experience, though only partly remembered. Eva had fallen asleep before the touch therapy had got well underway, and had woken an hour later to find Sally, fully dressed, standing by the bed with a cup of black coffee. "Oh, I do feel bad," Eva said, referring as much to her moral condition as to her physical. "Drink this and you'll feel better." Eva had drunk the coffee and got dressed, while Sally explained that post-contact inhibitory depression was a perfectly natural reaction to touch therapy at first. "You'll find it comes naturally after the first few sessions. You probably break down and cry and scream, and then felt tremendously liberated and relieved." "Do you think so?" "Oh, I'm sure I don't know." Sally had driven her home. "You and Henry must come to our barbecue Thursday night," she said. "I know G-Baby will want to meet you. You'll like him. He's a breast baby. He'll go crazy for you." "I tell you, she was pissed," said Wilt as he sat in the Braintree's kitchen, while Peter Braintree opened a bottle of beer for him. "Pissed and wearing some god-awful yellow pyjamas and smoking a cigarette in a long bloody holder." "What did she say?" "Well, she must know. She said, 'Come here.' No, it's too much. I had a perfectly foul day at the Tech. Morris tells me I haven't got my senior lectureship. Williams is off sick again, so I lose a free period. I get punched in the face by a great Loughton Printers 3, and I come home to a drunk wife who calls me penis baby." "She called you what?" said Peter Braintree, staring at him. "You heard me." "Eva? Called you penis baby?" "I don't believe it." Well, you go round there and see what she calls you, said Wilt bitterly. And don't blame me if she sucks your nipples off oral-wise while she's about it. Good Lord. Is that what she threatened to do? That and more, said Wilt. It doesn't sound like Eva. It really doesn't. It didn't fucking look like her either, come to that. She was all dolled up in yellow beach pyjamas. You should have seen the colour. It would have made a buttercup look drab. And she got some ghastly scarlet lipstick smeared round her mouth. And she was smoking. She hasn't smoked for 6 years. And then all this penis baby nipple-sucking stuff. And oral-wise. Peter Braintree shook his head. It's a filthy word, he said. Perfectly filthy act, too, if you ask me, said Wilt. Well, I must say it all sounds pretty peculiar, said Braintree. God knows what I'd do if Susan came home and started insisting on sucking my tits. Do what I did. Get out of the house, said Wilt. Anyway, it isn't just nipples either. Damn it, we've been married 12 long years. It's a bit late in the day to start arsing about oral-wise. The thing is, she's on this sexual liberation kick. Came home last night from Mavis Mottram's flower arrangement, jabbering about clitoral stimulation and open-ended freewheeling sexual options. Freewheeling what? Sexual options. Oh, perhaps I've got it wrong. I know sexual options came into it somewhere. I was half asleep at the time. Where the hell did she get all this from? Said Braintree. Oh, some bloody Yank called Sally Pringsheim, said Wilt. You know what Eva's like. I mean, she can smell intellectual claptrap a mile off and homes in on it like a bloody dung beetle hailing from an open sewer. An idea how many phony latest ideas I've had to put up with. Well, most of them I could manage to live with. I just let her get on with it and go my own quiet way. But when it comes to participating oral-wise while she blathers on about women's lib, when you can count me out. What I don't understand about sexual freedom and women's lib is why you have to go back to the nursery to be liberated, said Braintree. There seems to be this loony idea that you have to be passionately in love all the time. Apes, said Wilt morosely. Apes? What about apes? It's all this business about the animal model. If animals do it, then humans must. Territorial imperative and the naked ape. You stand everything on his head, and instead of aspiring, you retrogress 1,000,000 years. Hitch your wagon to an orangutan. The egalitarianism of the lowest common denominator. I don't see what that's got to do with sex, said Braintree. Nor do I, said Wilt. They went down to the Pig in a Poke and got drunk. It was midnight before Wilt got home, and Eva was asleep. Wilt climbed surreptitiously into bed and lay in the darkness thinking about high levels of estrogen. In Rossiter Grove, the Pringsheims came back from Ma Tante's, tired and bored. Swedes are the bottom, said Sally as she undressed. Gaskell sat down and took off his shoes. Oh, Engstrom's all right. His wife's just left him for a low-temperature physicist at Cambridge. He's not usually so depressed. Well, he could have fooled me. And talking about wives, I have met the most unliberated woman you've ever set eyes on. Name of Eva Wilt. She's got boobs like cantaloupes. Oh, don't, said Dr. Pringsheim. If there's one thing I don't need right now, it's unliberated wives with breasts. He climbed into bed and took his glasses off. I had her round here today. Had her? Sally smiled. Gaskell, honey, you got a toadsome mind. Gaskell Pringsheim smiled myopically at himself in the mirror above. He was proud of his mind. I just know you love her, he said. I know your funny little habits. And while we're on the subject of habits, what are all those boxes in the guest room? You haven't been spending money again. You know our budget this month. Sally flounced into bed. Budget, fudget, she said. I'm sending them all back tomorrow. All? Well, not all, but most. I had to impress Booby Baby somehow. You don't have to buy half a shop just to... Gaskell, honey, if you just let me finish, said Sally. She's a manic, a lovely, beautiful, obsessive, compulsive manic. She can't sit still for half a minute without tidying and cleaning and polishing and washing up. Oh, that's all we need, a manic, compulsive woman around the house all the time. Who needs two? Two? I'm not manic. You're manic enough for me, said Gaskell. But this one's got boobs, baby, boobs. Anyway, I've invited them over on Thursday for the barbecue. What the hell for? Well, if you won't buy me a dishwasher, like I've asked you 100 times, I'm going out to get one. A nice, manic, compulsive dishwasher with boobs on. Jesus, sighed Gaskell. Are you a bitch? Henry Wilt, you're a sod, said Eva next morning. Wilt sat up in bed. He felt terrible. His nose was even more painful than the day before. His head ached, and he spent much of the night expunging the harpic from the bowl in the bathroom. He was in no mood to be woken up and told he was a sod. He looked at the clock. It was 8 o'clock, and he had bricklayers too at 9. He got out of bed and made for the bathroom. Did you hear what I said? Eva demanded, getting out of bed herself. I heard, said Wilt, and saw that she was naked. Eva Wilt, naked, at 8 o'clock in the morning, was almost as startling a sight as Eva Wilt drunk, smoking, and dressed in lemon-yellow pyjamas at 6 o'clock at night, and even less enticing. What the hell are you going about like that for? If it comes to that, what's wrong with your nose? I suppose you got drunk and fell down. It looks all red and swollen. It is all red and swollen. And if you must know, I didn't fall down. Now, for goodness sake, get out of the way. I've got a lecture at 9. He pushed past her and went into the bathroom and looked at his nose. It looked awful. Eva followed him in. If you didn't fall on it, what did happen? She demanded. Wilt squeezed foam from an aerosol and patted it gingerly on his chin. Well, said Eva. Wilt picked up his razor and put it under the hot tap. I had an accident, he muttered. With a lamp-post, I suppose. I knew you'd been drinking. With a printer, said Wilt indistinctly and started to shave. With a printer? To be precise, I got punched in the face by a particularly pugnacious apprentice printer. Eva stared at him in the mirror. Do you mean to say a student hit you in the classroom? Wilt nodded. I hope you hit him back. Wilt cut himself. No, I bloody didn't, he said, dabbing his chin with a finger. Now look what you made me do. Eva ignored his complaint. Well, you should have. You're not a man. You should have hit him back. Wilt put down the razor and got the sack. Got hauled up in court for assaulting a student. Now that's what I call a brilliant idea. He reached for the sponge and washed his face. Eva retreated to the bedroom, satisfied. There'd be no mention of her lemon loungers now. She'd taken his mind off her own little extravagance and given him a sense of grievance that would keep him occupied for the time being. By the time she had finished dressing, Wilt had eaten a bowl of all-bran, drunk half a cup of coffee, and was snarled up in a traffic jam at the roundabout. Eva went downstairs and had her own breakfast and began the daily round of washing up and hoovering and cleaning the bath and... Commitment, said Dr. Mayfield, to an integrated approach is an essential element in... The Joint Committee for the Further Development of Liberal Studies was in session. Wilt squirmed in his chair and wished to hell it wasn't. Dr. Mayfield's paper, Cerebral Content and the Non-Academic Syllabus, held no interest for him. And besides, it was delivered in such convoluted sentences and with so much monotonous fervour that Wilt found it difficult to stay awake. He stared out of the window at the machines boring away on the site of the new admin block. There was a reality about the work going on down there that was in marked contrast to the impractical theories Dr. Mayfield was expounding. If the man really thought that he could instill cerebral content, whatever that was, into Gasfitters 3, he was out of his mind. Worse still, his blasted paper was bound to provoke an argument at question time. Wilt looked round the room. The various factions were all there. The new left, the old left, the indifferent centre, the cultural right, and the reactionary right. Wilt classed himself with the indifferents. In earlier years he'd belonged to the left politically and to the right culturally. In other words, he banned the bomb, supported abortion and the abolition of private education, and had been against capital punishment, thus earning himself something of a reputation as a radical, while at the same time advocating a return to the craft of the wheelwright, the blacksmith, and the handloom weaver, which had done much to undermine the efforts of the technical staff to instill in their students an appreciation of the opportunities provided by modern technology. Time and the intransigent coarseness of plasterers had changed all that. Wilt's ideals had vanished, to be replaced by the conviction that the man who said the pen was mightier than the sword ought to have tried reading The Mill on the Floss to Motor Mechanics 3 before he opened his big mouth. In Wilt's view, the sword had much to recommend it. As Dr. Mayfield droned on, as question time with its ideological arguments followed, Wilt studied the pile hole on the building site. It would make an ideal depository for a body, and there would be something immensely satisfying in knowing that Eva, who in her lifetime had been so unbearable, was in death supporting the weight of a multi-story concrete building. Besides, it would make her discovery an extremely remote possibility, and her identification out of the question. Not even Eva, who boasted a strong constitution and a stronger will, could maintain an identity at the bottom of a pile shaft. The difficulty would be getting her to go down the hole in the first place. Sleeping pills seemed a sensible preliminary, but Eve was a sound sleeper and didn't believe in pills of any sort. I can't imagine why not, Wilt thought grimly. She prepared to believe in just about anything else. His reverie was interrupted by Mr. Morris, who was bringing the meeting to a close. "Before you all go," he said, "there's one more subject I want to mention. We've been asked by the head of engineering to conduct a series of one-hour lectures to Sandwich Course trainee firemen. The theme this year will be Problems of Contemporary Society. I've drawn up a list of topics and the lecturers who will give them." Mr. Morris handed out subjects at random. Major Millfield got media, communications, and participatory democracy, about which he knew nothing and cared less. Peter Braintree was given the new brutalism in architecture, its origins and social attributes, and Wilt ended up with violence and the break-up of family life. On the whole, he thought he'd done rather well. The subject fitted in with his present preoccupations. Mr. Morris evidently agreed. "I thought you might like to have a go at it, after yesterday's little episode with Printers 3, he said as they went out. Wilt smiled wanly and went off to take Fitters and Turners too. He gave them Shane to read and spent the hour jotting down notes for his lecture. In the distance, he could hear the pile-boring machines grinding away. Wilt could imagine Eva lying at the bottom as they poured the concrete in her lemon pyjamas. It was a nice thought and helped him with his notes. He wrote down a heading, Crime in the Family, subheading A, Murder of Spouse Declining Since Divorce Laws. Yes, he should be able to talk about that, trainee fireman. 4. "I loathe parties," said Wilt on Thursday night. "And if there's one thing worse than parties, it's university parties, and bottle parties are the worst of all. You take along a bottle of decent Burgundy and end up drinking someone else's rot gut." "It isn't a party," said Eva. "It's a barbecue." "It says here, Come and Touch and Come with Sally and Gaskell, 9 p.m. Thursday. Bring your own ambrosia or take pot luck with the Pringsheim punch. If ambrosia doesn't mean Algerian bilge water, I'd like to know what it does mean." "I thought it was that stuff people take to get a hard-on," said Eva. Wilt looked at her with disgust. "You've picked up some choice phrases since you've met these bloody people. A hard-on. Don't know what's got into you." "Well, you haven't, that's for sure," said Eva, and went through to the bathroom. Wilt sat on the bed and looked at the card. The beastly thing was shaped like a... What the hell was it shaped like? Anyway, it was pink and opened out, and inside were all these ambiguous words. Come and touch and come. Anyone touched him and they'd get an earful. What about pot luck? A lot of trendy dons smoking joints and talking about set theoretic data manipulation systems or the significance of pre-Popper Hegelianism in the contemporary dialectical scene, or something equally unintelligible, and using fuck and cunt every now and then to show they were still human. And what do you do? They'd ask him. Well, actually, I teach at the Tech. At the Tech? How frightfully interesting, looking over his shoulder towards more stimulating horizons. And he'd end the evening with some ghastly woman who felt strongly that Techs fulfilled a real function and that intellectual achievement was vastly overrated and that people should be oriented in a way that would make them community coordinated, and that's what Techs were doing, weren't they? Wilt knew what Techs were doing, paying people like him $3,500 a year to keep gasfitters quiet for an hour. And Pringsheim punch, planters punch, printers punch. We'd had enough punches recently. What the hell am I to wear? He asked. There's that Mexican shirt you brought on the Costa del Sol last year, Eva called from the bathroom. You haven't had a chance to wear it since. And I don't intend to now, muttered Wilt, rummaging through the drawer in search of something nondescript that would demonstrate his independence. In the end, he put on a striped shirt with blue jeans. You're surely not going like that, Eva told him, emerging from the bathroom largely naked. Her face was plastered with white powder, and her lips were carmine. Jesus wept, said Wilt. Mardi Gras with pernicious anemia. Eva pushed past him. I'm going as the Great Gatsby, she announced, and if you had any imagination, you'd think of something better than a business shirt with blue jeans. The Great Gatsby happened to be a man, said Wilt. Bully for him, said Eva, and put on her lemon loungers. Wilt shut his eyes and took off his shirt. By the time they left the house, he was wearing a red shirt with jeans, while Eva, in spite of the hot night, insisted on putting on her new raincoat and trilby. We might as well walk, said Wilt. They took the car. Eva wasn't yet prepared to walk down Parkview Avenue in a trilby, a belted raincoat, and lemon loungers. On the way, they stopped off at an off-licence where Wilt bought a bottle of Cyprus Red. Don't think I'm going to touch the muck, he said. And you better take the car keys now. If it's as bad as I think it will be, I'm walking home early. It was. Worse. In his red shirt and blue jeans, Wilt looked out of place. Darling Eva, said Sally, when they finally found her talking to a man in a loincloth made out of a kitchen towel advertising Irish cheeses. You look great. The 20s suit you. And so this is Henry. Henry didn't feel Henry at all. In period costume, too. Henry, meet Raphael. The man in the loincloth studied Wilt's jeans. The 50s are back, he said languidly. I suppose it was bound to happen. Wilt looked pointedly at a Connemara cheddar and tried to smile. Help yourself, Henry, said Sally, and took Eva off to meet the freest but the most liberated woman who was simply dying to meet Booby Baby. Wilt went into the garden and put his bottle on the table and looked for a corkscrew. There wasn't one. In the end, he looked into a large bucket with a ladle in it. Half an orange and segments of bruised peach floated in a purple liquid. He poured himself a paper cup and tried it. As he'd anticipated, it tasted like cider with wood alcohol and orange squash. Wilt looked round the garden. In one corner, a man in a chef's hat and a jockstrap was burning sausages over a charcoal grill. In another corner, a dozen people were lying in a circle listening to the Watergate tapes. There was a sprinkling of couples talking earnestly and a number of individuals standing by themselves looking supercilious and remote. Wilt recognized himself among them and selected the least attractive girl on the theory that he might as well jump in the deep end and get it over with. He'd end up with her anyway. Hi, he said, conscious that already he was slipping into the Americanese that Eva had succumbed to. The girl looked at him blankly and moved away. Charming. said Wilt, and finished his drink. 10 minutes and 2 drinks later, he was discussing rapid reading with a small, round man who seemed deeply interested in the subject. In the kitchen, Eva was cutting up French bread while Sally stood with a drink and talked about Levi Strauss with an Ethiopian who had just got back from New Guinea. "I always felt that LS was all wrong on the women's front," she said, languidly studying Eva's rear. "I mean, he disregards the essential similarity—" She stopped and stared out of the window. "Excuse me a moment," she said, and went out to rescue Dr. Scheimacher from the clutches of Henry Wilt. "Ernst is such a sweetie," she said when she came back. "You'd never guess he got the Nobel Prize for spermatology." Wilt stood in the middle of the garden and finished his 3rd drink. He poured himself a 4th and went to listen to the Watergate tapes. He got there in time to hear the end. "You get a much clearer insight into Tricky Dickie's character, quadraphonically," someone said as the group broke up. "With a highly gifted child, one has to develop a special relationship. Roger and I find that Tonio responds best to a constructional approach. As a load of bull, take what he says about quasars, for example. Well, I can't honestly see what's wrong with buggery. I don't care what Marcus thinks about tolerance. What I'm saying is, at minus 52, nitrogen... Burke does have his moments, I suppose, but he has his limitations. We've got this place at Saint-Tro. I still think Caldor had the answer." Wilt finished his 4th drink and went to look for Eva. He'd had enough. He was halted by a yell from the man in the chef's hat. "Burger's up! Come and get it!" Wilt staggered off and got it. 2 sausages, a burnt beef burger, and a slosh of coleslaw on a paper plate. There didn't seem to be any knives or forks. "Poor Henry's looking so forlorn," said Sally. "I'll go and transfuse him." She went out and took Wilt's arm. "You're so lucky to have Eva. She's the babiest baby." "She's 35, said Wilt drunkenly. 35 if she's a day." "Marvelous to meet a man who says what he means," said Sally, and took a piece of beef burger from his plate. "Gaskell just never says anything straightforwardly. I love down-to-earth people." She sat down on the grass and pulled Wilt down with her. "I think it's terribly important for 2 people to tell one another the truth," she went on, breaking off another piece of beef burger and popping it into Wilt's mouth. She licked her fingers slowly and looked at him with wide eyes. Wilt chewed the bit uneasily and finally swallowed it. It tasted like burnt mincemeat with a soupçon of Lancôme, or a bouquet. "Why 2?" he asked, rinsing his mouth out with coleslaw. "Why 2 what?" "Why 2 people?" said Wilt. "Why is it so important for 2 people to tell the truth?" "Well, I mean, why not 3, or 4, or 100? 100 people can't have a relationship. Not an intimate one," said Sally. "Not a meaningful one." "I don't know many 2s who can either," said Wilt. Sally dabbed her finger in his coleslaw. "Oh, but you do. You and Eva have this real thing going between you." "Not very often," said Wilt. Sally laughed. "Oh, baby, you're a truth baby," she said, and got up and fetched 2 more drinks. Wilt looked down into his paper cup doubtfully. He was getting very drunk. "If I'm a truth baby, what sort of baby are you, baby?" he asked, endeavoring to instill the last baby with more than a soupçon of contempt. Sally snuggled up to him and whispered in his ear. "I'm a body baby," she said. "I can see that," said Wilt. "You've got a very nice body." "That's the nicest thing anybody has ever said to me," said Sally. "In that case," said Wilt, picking up a blackened sausage, "you must have had a deprived childhood." "As a matter of fact, I did," Sally said, and plucked the sausage from his fingers. "That's why I need so much loving now." She put most of the sausage in her mouth, drew it out slowly, and nibbled the end. Wilt finished off the coleslaw and washed it down with Pringsheim punch. "Aren't they all awful?" said Sally as shouts and laughter came from the corner of the garden by the grill. Wilt looked up. "As a matter of fact, they are," he said. "Who's the clown in the jockstrap?" "Oh, that's Gaskell. He's so arrested. He loves playing at things. In the States, he just loves to ride footplate on a locomotive, and he goes to rodeos, and last Christmas he insisted on dressing up as Santa Claus and going down to Watts and giving out presents to all the black kids at an orphanage. Of course they wouldn't let him." "Well, if they went in a jockstrap, I'm not in the least surprised," said Wilt. Sally laughed. "You must be an Aries," she said. "You don't mind what you say." She got to her feet and pulled Wilt up. "I'm going to show you his toy room. It's ever so droll." Wilt put down his plate and they went into the house. In the kitchen, Eva was peeling oranges for a fruit salad and talking about circumcision rites with the Ethiopian who was slicing bananas for her. In the lounge, several couples were dancing back to back very vigorously to an LP of Beethoven's Fifth played at 78. "Christ," said Wilt, as Sally collected a bottle of vodka from a cupboard. They went upstairs and down a passage to a small bedroom filled with toys. There was a model train set on the floor, a punch bag, an enormous teddy bear, a rocking horse, a fireman's helmet, and a life-size inflated doll that looked like a real woman. "That's Judy," said Sally. "She's got a real cunt. Gaskell is a plastic freak." Wilt winced. "And here are Gaskell's toys. Puberty baby." Wilt looked round the room at the mess and shook his head. "Looks as though he's making up for a lost childhood," he said. "Oh, Henry, you're so perceptive," said Sally, and unscrewed the top of the vodka bottle. "No, I'm not. It's just bloody obvious." "Oh, you are. You're just terribly modest is all. Modest and shy and manly." She swigged from the bottle and gave it to Wilt. He took a mouthful inadvisedly and had trouble swallowing it. Sally locked the door and sat down on the bed. She reached up a hand and pulled Wilt towards her. "Screw me, Henry, baby," she said and lifted her skirt. "Fuck me, honey. Screw the pants off me." "That," said Wilt, "would be a bit difficult." "Oh? Why?" "Well, for one thing, you don't appear to be wearing any. And anyway, why should I?" "You want a reason? A reason for screwing?" "Yes," said Wilt. "Yes, I do." "Reason's treason. Feel free." She pulled him down and kissed him. Wilt didn't feel free at all. "Don't be shy, baby." "Shy?" said Wilt, lurching to one side. "Me? Shy?" "Sure you're shy. Okay, you're small. Eva told me." "Small? What do you mean I'm small?" shouted Wilt furiously. Sally smiled up at him. "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Just you and me, and it bloody well does matter," snarled Wilt. "My wife said I was small. I'll soon show the silly bitch who's small. I'll show..." "Show me, Henry, baby, show me. I like them small. Prick me to the quick." "That's not true," Wilt mumbled.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the next cassette, side 3.
"Prove it, lover," said Sally, squirming against him. "I won't," said Wilt, and stood up. Sally stopped squirming and looked at him. "You're just afraid," she said. "You're afraid to be free." "Free? Free?" shouted Wilt, trying to open the door. "Locked in a room with another man's wife is freedom? You've got to be joking." Sally pulled down her skirt and sat up. "You won't?" "No," said Wilt. "Are you a bondage baby? You can tell me. I'm used to bondage babies. Gaskell is real." "Certainly not," said Wilt. "I don't care what Gaskell is." "You want a blowjob, is that it? You want for me to give you a blowjob?" She got off the bed and came towards him. Wilt looked at her wildly. "Don't you touch me," he said, his mind alive with images of burning paint. "I don't want anything from you." Sally stopped and stared at him. She wasn't smiling anymore. Why not? Because you're small. Is that why? Wilt backed against the door. No, it isn't. Because you haven't the courage of your instincts. Because you're a psychic virgin. Because you're not a man. Because you can't take a woman who thinks. Thinks? Yelled Wilt, stung into action by the accusation that he wasn't a man. Thinks? You think? Do you know something? I'd rather have it off with that plastic mechanical doll than you. It's got more sex appeal in its little finger than you have in your whole rotten body. When I want a whore, I'll buy one. Why, you little shit, said Sally and lunged at him. Wilt scuttled sideways and collided with the punch bag. The next moment he'd stepped on a model engine and was hurtling across the room. As he slumped down the wall onto the floor, Sally finally picked up the doll and leant over him. In the kitchen, Eva had finished the fruit salad and had made coffee. It was a lovely party. Mr. Rosewa had told her all about his job as underdevelopment officer in the cultural affairs to UNESCO, and how rewarding he found it. She had been kissed twice on the back of the neck by Dr. Scheimacher in passing, and the man in the Irish cheese loincloth had pressed himself against her rather more firmly than was absolutely necessary to reach the tomato ketchup. And all round her, terribly clever people were being so outspoken. It was all so sophisticated. She helped herself to another drink and looked round for Henry. He was nowhere to be seen. "Have you seen Henry?" she asked when Sally came into the kitchen, holding a bottle of vodka and looking rather flushed. "The last I saw of him, he was sitting with some dolly bird," said Sally, helping herself to a spoonful of fruit salad. "Oh, Eva, darling. You're absolutely cordon bleu, baby." Eva blushed. "I do hope he's enjoying himself. Henry's not awfully good at parties." "Eva, baby, be honest. Henry's not awfully good, period." "Oh, it's just that he—" Eva began, but Sally kissed her. "You're far too good for him," she said. "We've got to find you someone really beautiful." While Eva sipped her drink, Sally found a young man with a frond of hair falling across his forehead, who was lying on a couch with a girl, smoking and staring at the ceiling. "Christopher, precious," she said, "I'm going to steal you for a moment. I want you to do someone for me. Go into the kitchen and sweeten the woman with the boobies and the awful yellow pajamas." "Oh, God, why me?" "My sweet, you know you're utterly irresistible, but the sexiest. For me, baby, for me." Christopher got off the couch and went into the kitchen. Sally stretched out beside the girl. "Christopher is a dream boy," she said. "He's a gigolo," said the girl. "A male prostitute." "Darling," said Sally, "it's about time we women had them." In the kitchen, Eva stopped pouring coffee. She was feeling delightfully tipsy. "You mustn't," she said hastily. "Why not?" "I'm married." "I like it. I like it." "Yes, but—" "No buts, lover." "Oh." Upstairs in the toy room, Wilt, recovering slowly from the combined assaults on his system of Pringsheim punch, vodka, his nymphomaniac hostess, and the corner of the cupboard against which he'd fallen, had the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't simply that the room was oscillating, that he had a lump on the back of his head, or that he was naked. It was rather the sensation that something with all the less attractive qualities of a mousetrap, or a vice, or a starving clam had attached itself implacably to what he had up until now always considered to be the most private of his parts. Wilt opened his eyes and found himself staring into a smiling, if slightly swollen, face. He shut his eyes again, hoped against hope, opened them again, found the face still there, and made an effort to sit up. It was an unwise move. Judy, the plastic doll, inflated beyond her normal pressure, resisted. With a squawk, Wilt fell back on the floor. Judy followed. Her nose bounced on his face and her breasts on his chest. With a curse, Wilt rolled on his side and considered the problem. Sitting up was out of the question. That way led to castration. He would have to try something else. He rolled the doll over further and climbed on top, only to decide that his weight on it was increasing the pressure on what remained of his penis, and that if he wanted to get gangrene, that was the way to go about getting it. Wilt rolled off precipitately and groped for a valve. There must be one somewhere, if he could only find it. But if there was a valve, it was well hidden, and by the feel of things, he hadn't got time to waste finding it. He felt round on the floor for something to use as a dagger, something sharp, and finally broke off a piece of railway track and plunged it into his assailant's back. There was a squeak of plastic, but Judy's swollen smile remained unchanged and her unwanted attentions as implacable as ever. Again and again he stabbed her, but to no avail. Wilt dropped his makeshift dagger and considered other means. He was getting frantic, conscious of a new threat. It was no longer that he was the subject of her high air pressure. His own internal pressures were mounting. The Pringsheim punch and the vodka were making their presence felt. With a desperate thought that if he didn't get out of her soon he'd burst, Wilt seized Judy's head, bent it sideways, and sank his teeth into her neck. Or would have, had her pounds per square inch permitted. Instead, he bounced off and spent the next 2 minutes trying to find his false tooth, which had been dislodged in the exchange. By the time he got it back in place, panic had set in. He had to get out of the doll, he just had to. There'd be a razor in the bathroom or a pair of scissors, but where on earth was the bathroom? Never mind about that, he'd find the damn thing. Carefully, very carefully, he rolled the doll onto her back and followed her over. Then he inched his knees up until he was straddling the thing. All he needed now was something to hold on to while he got to his feet. Wilt leant over and grasped the edge of a chair with one hand, while lifting Judy's head off the floor with the other. A moment later, he was on his feet. Holding the doll to him, he shuffled towards the door and opened it. He peered out into the passage. What if someone saw him? Oh, to hell with that. Wilt no longer cared what people thought about him, but which way was the bathroom? Wilt turned right, and peering frantically over Judy's shoulder, shuffled off down the passage. Downstairs, Eva was having a wonderful time. First Christopher, then the man in the Irish cheese loincloth, and finally Dr. Scheimacher had all made advances to her and been rebuffed. It was such a change from Henry's lack of interest. It showed she was still attractive. Dr. Scheimacher had said that she was an interesting example of latent steatopygia. Christopher tried to kiss her breasts, and the man in the loincloth had made the most extraordinary suggestion to her. And through it all, Eva had remained entirely virtuous. Her massive skittishness, her insistence on dancing, and, most effective of all, her habit of saying in a loud and not wholly cultivated voice, "Oh, you are awful," at moments of their greatest ardour, had had a markedly deterrent effect. Now she sat on the floor in the living room, while Sally and Gaskell and the bearded man from the Institute of Ecological Research argued about sexually interchangeable role-playing in a population-restrictive society. She felt strangely elated. Parkview Avenue and Mavis Mottram and her work at the Harmony Community Centre seemed to belong to another world. She had been accepted by people who flew to California or Tokyo to conferences and think tanks as casually as she took the bus to town. Dr. Scheimacher had mentioned that he was flying to New Delhi in the morning, and Christopher had just come back from a photographic assignment in Trinidad. Above all, there was an aura of importance about what they were doing, a glamour that was wholly lacking in Henry's job at the Tech. If only she could get him to do something interesting and adventurous. But Henry was such a stick in the mud. She'd made a mistake in marrying him. She really had. All he was interested in was books. But life wasn't found in books. Like Sally said, life was for living. Life was people and experiences and fun. Henry would never see that. In the bathroom, Wilt could see very little. He certainly couldn't see any way of getting out of the doll. His attempt to slit the beastly thing's throat with a razor had failed, thanks largely to the fact that the razor in question was a Wilkinson bonded blade. Having failed with the razor, he'd tried shampoo as a lubricant, but apart from working up a lather, which even to his jaundiced eye looked as though he'd aroused the doll to positively frenzied heights of sexual expectation, The shampoo had achieved nothing. Finally, he'd reverted to a quest for the valve. The damned thing had one somewhere, if only he could find it. In this endeavour, he peered into the mirror on the door of the medicine cabinet, but the mirror was too small. There was a large one over the wash basin. Wilt pulled down the lid of the toilet and climbed onto it. This way, he'd be able to get a clear view of the doll's back. He was just inching his way round when there were footsteps in the passage. Wilt stopped inching and stood rigid on the toilet lid. Someone tried the door and found it locked. The footsteps retreated, and Wilt breathed a sigh of relief. Now then, just let him find that valve. And at that moment, disaster struck. Wilt's left foot stepped in the shampoo that had dripped onto the toilet seat, slid sideways off the edge, and Wilt, the doll, and the door of the medicine cabinet with which he'd attempted to save himself were momentarily airborne. As they hurtled into the bath, as the shower curtain and fitting followed, as the contents of the medicine cabinet cascaded onto the wash basin, Wilt gave a last despairing scream. There was a pop reminiscent of champagne corks, and Judy, finally responding to the pressure of Wilt's 11 stone dropping from several feet into the bath, ejected him. But Wilt no longer cared. He had, in every sense, passed out. He was only dimly aware of shouts in the corridor, of someone breaking the door down, of faces peering at him, and of hysterical laughter. When he came to, he was lying on the bed in the toy room. He got up and put on his clothes and crept downstairs and out of the front door. It was 3 a.m. 5. Eva sat on the edge of the bed, crying. "How could he? How could he do a thing like that?" she said, "in front of all his people?" "Eva, baby, men are like that, believe me," said Sally. "But with a doll." "That's symbolic of the male chauvinist pig attitude to women. We're just fuck artifacts to them, objectification. So now you know how Henry feels about you." "It's horrible," said Eva. "Sure, it's horrible. Male domination debases us to the level of objects." "But Henry's never done anything like that before," Eva wailed. "Well, he's done it now." "I'm not going back to it. I couldn't face it. I feel so ashamed." "Honey, you just forget about it. You don't have to go anywhere. Sally will look after you. You just lie down and get some sleep." Eva lay back, but sleep was impossible. The image of Henry lying naked in the bath on top of that horrible doll was fixed in her mind. They had to break the door down, and Dr. Scheimarker had cut his hand on a broken bottle trying to get Henry out of the bath. Oh, it was all too awful. She'd never be able to look people in the face again. The story was bound to get out, and she'd be known as the woman whose husband went around... With a fresh paroxysm of embarrassment, Eva buried her head in the pillow and wept. "Well, that sure made the party go with a bang," said Gaskell. "Guy screws a doll in the bathroom, and everyone goes berserk." He looked round at the living room and the mess. "If anyone thinks I'm going to start clearing this lot up now, they better think again. I'm going to bed." "Just don't wake Eva up. She's hysterical," said Sally. "Oh, great. Now we've got a manic, obsessive-compulsive woman with hysteria in the house. And tomorrow she's coming with us on the boat." "She's what?" "You heard me. She's coming with us on the boat." "Now, wait a bit." Now, I'm not arguing with you, G. I'm telling you. She's coming with us. "Why, for Christ's sake?" "Because I'm not having her go back to that creep of a husband of hers. Because you wouldn't get me a cleaning woman. And because I like her." "Because I won't get you a cleaning woman. Now I've heard it all." No, you haven't," said Sally. "You haven't heard the half of it. You may not know it, but you married a liberated woman. No male pig is going to put one over on me." "I'm not trying to put one over on you," said Gaskell. "All I'm saying is I don't want to have to—" "I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about that creep Wilt. Do you think he got into that doll by himself? Think again, G-baby, think again. Gaskell sat down on the sofa and stared at her. You must be out of your mind. What the hell did you want to do a thing like that for? Because when I liberate someone, I liberate them. No mistake. Liberate someone by... He shook his head. It doesn't make sense. Sally poured herself a drink. The trouble with you, G, is that you talk big, but you don't do. It's yakety-yak with you. My wife is a liberated woman. My wife's free. Nice-sounding talk, but come to the time your liberated wife takes it into her head to do something, you don't want to know. Yeah, and when you take it into your goddamn head to do something, who takes the can back? I do. Where's petticoats then? Who got you out of that mess in Omaha? Who paid the fuzz in Houston that time? So you did. So why did you marry me? Just why? Gaskell polished his glasses with the edge of the chef's hat. I don't know, he said. So help me, I don't know. For kicks, baby, for kicks. Without me, you'd have died of boredom. With me, you get excitement. With me, you get kicks. In the teeth. Gaskell got up wearily and headed for the stairs. It was at times like this he wondered why he had married. Wilt walked home in agony. His pain was no longer physical. It was the agony of humiliation, hatred, and self-contempt. He'd been made to look a fool, a pervert, and an idiot in front of people he despised. The Pringheims and their set were everything he loathed, false, phony, pretentious, a circus of intellectual clowns whose antics had not even the merit of his own, which had at least been real. Theirs were merely a parody of enjoyment. They laughed to hear themselves laughing, and paraded a sensuality that had nothing to do with feelings or even instincts, but was dredged up from some shallow imagination to mimic lust. Copulo ergo sum. And that bitch, Sally, had taunted him with not having the courage of his instincts, as if instinct consisted of ejaculating into the chemically sterilized body of a woman that he'd first met 20 minutes before. And Wilt had reacted instinctively, shying away from a concupiscence that had to do with power and arrogance and an intolerable contempt for him, which presupposed that what he was, what little he was a mere extension of his penis, and that the ultimate expression of his thoughts, feelings, hopes, and ambitions was to be attained between the legs of a trendy slut. And that was being liberated? Feel free, she'd said, and had knotted him into that fucking doll. Wilt ground his teeth underneath a street lamp. And what about Eva? What sort of hell was she going to make for him now? If life had been intolerable with her before this, it was going to be unadulterated misery now. She wouldn't believe that he hadn't been screwing that doll, that he hadn't got into it of his own accord, that he'd been put into it by Sally. Not in a month of Sundays. And even if by some miracle she accepted his story, a fat lot of difference that would make. What sort of man do you think you are, letting a woman do a thing like that to you? She would ask. There was absolutely no reply to the question. What sort of man was he? Wilt had no idea. An insignificant little man to whom things happened, and for whom life was a chapter of indignities. Printers punched him in the face, and he was blamed for it. His wife bullied him, and other people's wives made a laughing-stock out of him. Wilt wandered on along suburban streets, past semi-detached houses and little gardens, with a mounting sense of determination. He had had enough of being the butt of circumstance. From now on, things would happen because he wanted them to. He would change from being the recipient of misfortune. He would be the instigator. Just let Eva try anything now. He'd knock the bitch down. Wilt stopped. It was all very well to talk. The bloody woman had a weapon she wouldn't hesitate to use. Knock her down, my eye. If anyone went down, it'd be Wilt. And in addition, she'd parade his affair with the doll to everyone they knew. It wouldn't be long before the story reached the tech. In the darkness of Parkview Avenue, Wilt shuddered at the thought. It would be the end of his career. He went through the gate of number 34 and unlocked the front door, with the feeling that unless he took some drastic action in the immediate future, he was doomed. In bed an hour later, he was still awake, wide awake, and wrestling with the problem of Eva, his own character, and how to change it into something he could respect. And what did he respect? Under the blankets, Wilt clenched his fist. Decisiveness, he murmured. The ability to act without hesitation. Courage. A strange litany of ancient virtues. But how to acquire them now? How had they turned men like him into commandos and professional killers during the war? By training them. Wilt lay in the darkness and considered ways in which he could train himself to become what he was clearly not. By the time he fell asleep, he was determined to attempt the impossible. At 7, the alarm went. Wilt got up and went into the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. He was a hard man, a man without feelings. Hard, methodical, cold-blooded, and logical. A man who made no mistakes. He went downstairs and ate his all-bran and drank his cup of coffee. So, Eva wasn't home. She'd stayed the night at the Pringsheims. Well, that was something. It made things easier for him. Except that she still had the car and the keys. He certainly wasn't going to go round and get the car. He walked down to the roundabout and caught the bus to the Tech. He had Bricklayers 1 in room 456. When he arrived, they were talking about grad bashing. There was a student all dressed up like a waiter, see? Do you mind, he said. Do you mind getting out of my way? Just like that. And all I was doing was looking in the window at the books. At the books, said Wilt sceptically. At 11 o'clock at night you were looking at books, I don't believe it. Magazines and cowboy books, said the bricklayer. They're in a junk shop in Finch Street. They got girly mags, someone else explained. Wilt nodded. That sounded more like it. So I said, mind what? Continued the bricklayer. And he says, mind out of my way. His way, like he owned the bloody street. So what did you say? Asked Wilt. Say? I didn't say anything. I wasn't wasting words on him. What did you do then? Well, I put a boot in and duffed him up. Gave him a good going over, no mistake. Then I pushed off. There's one bloody grad who won't go telling people to get out of his way for a bit. The class nodded approvingly. They're all the bloody same, students, said another bricklayer. Ain't because they got money and go to college they can order you about. They can all do with a going over, do them a power of good. Wilt considered the implications of mugging as part of an intellectual's education. After his experience the previous night, he was inclined to think there was something to be said for it. He would have liked to have duffed up half the people at the Pringsheim's party. So none of you feel there's anything wrong with beating up a student if he gets in your way? He asked. Wrong? Said the bricklayers in unison. What's wrong with a good punch-up? It's not as if the grad is an old woman or something. He can always hit back, can't he? They spent the rest of the hour discussing violence in the modern world. On the whole, the bricklayers seemed to think it was a good thing. I mean, what's the point of going out on a Saturday night and getting pissed if you can't have a bit of a barney at the same time? You've got to get rid of your aggression somehow, said an unusually articulate bricklayer. It's natural, isn't it? So you think man's a naturally aggressive animal, said Wilt. Of course he is. That's history for you. All them wars and things. It's only bloody poofters don't like violence. Wilt took this view of things along to the staff room for his free period and collected a cup of coffee from the vending machine. He was joined by Peter Braintree. How did the party go? Braintree asked. It didn't, said Wilt morosely. Eva enjoy it? I wouldn't know. She hadn't come home by the time I got up this morning. Hadn't come home? That's what I said, said Wilt. Well, did you ring up and find out what had happened to her? Nope, said Wilt. Why not? Because I'd look a bit of a twit ringing up and being told she was shacked up with the Abyssinian ambassador, wouldn't I? The Abyssinian ambassador, was he there? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Last I saw of her, she was being chatted up by this big black bloke from Ethiopia, something to do with the United Nations. She was making fruit salad and he was chopping bananas for her. Well, it doesn't sound a very compromising sort of activity to me, said Braintree. No, I dare say it doesn't, only you weren't there and don't know what sort of party it was, said Wilt, rapidly coming to the conclusion that an edited version of the night's events was called for. A whole lot of middle-aged, withered kids doing their withered thing. Sounds bloody awful. And you think Eva... I think Eva got pissed and someone gave her a joint and she passed out, said Wilt. That's what I think. She's probably sleeping it off in the downstairs loo. Doesn't sound like Eva to me, said Braintree. Wilt drank his coffee and considered his strategy. If the story of his involvement with that fucking doll was going to come out, perhaps it would be better if he told it his way first. On the other hand... What were you doing while all this was going on? Braintree asked. Well, said Wilt, as a matter of fact... He hesitated. On second thoughts, it might be better not to mention the doll at all. If Eva kept her trap shut... I got a bit slewed myself. Ah, that sounds more like it, said Braintree. I suppose you made a pass at another woman, too. If you must know, said Wilt, another woman made a pass at me. Mrs. Pringsheim. Mrs. Pringsheim made a pass at you? Well, we went upstairs to look at her husband's toys. His toys? I thought you told me he was a biochemist. He is a biochemist, yes. He just happens to like playing with toys. Model trains and teddy bears and things. She says he's a case of arrested development. She would, though. She's that sort of loyal wife. Well, what happened then? Apart from her locking the door and lying on the bed with her legs wide open and asking me to screw her and threatening me with a blowjob, nothing happened, said Wilt. Peter Braintree looked at him sceptically. Nothing, he said finally. Nothing? I mean, what did you do? Equivocated, said Wilt. That's a new word for it, said Braintree. You go upstairs with Mrs. Pringsheim and equivocate while she lies on her bed with her legs open. And you want to know why Eva hasn't come home? She's probably round at some lawyer's office filing a petition for divorce right now. But I tell you I didn't screw the bitch, said Wilt. I told her to hawk her pearly somewhere else. And you call that equivocating? Hawk her pearly. Where the hell did you get an expression like that from? Meet one, said Wilt, got up and fetched himself another coffee. By the time he came back to his seat, he'd decided on his version. I don't know what happened after that, he said when Braintree insisted on hearing the next episode. I passed out. It must have been the vodka. You just passed out in a locked room with a naked woman? Is that what happened? Said Braintree. He didn't sound as if he believed a word of the story. Precisely, said Wilt. And when you came to? I was walking home, said Wilt. I've no idea what happened in between. Oh, well, I dare say we'll hear about that from Eva, said Braintree. She's bound to know. He got up and went off, and Wilt was left alone to consider his next move. The first thing to do was to make sure that Eva didn't say anything. He went through to the telephone in the corridor and dialed his home number. There was no reply. Wilt went along to room 187 and spent an hour with turners and fitters. Several times during the day he tried to telephone Eva, but there was no answer. She's probably spent the day round at Mavis Mottram's, weeping on her shoulder and telling all and sundry what a pig I am, he thought. She's bound to be waiting for me when I get home tonight. But she wasn't. Instead, there was a note on the kitchen table and a package. Wilt opened the note. I'm going away with Sally and Gaskell to think things over. What you did last night was horrible. I won't ever forgive you. Don't forget to buy some dog food, Eva. P.S. Sally says next time you want a blowjob, get Judy to give you one. Wilt looked at the package. He knew without opening it what it contained. That infernal doll. In a sudden paroxysm of rage, Wilt picked it up and hurled it across the kitchen at the sink. 2 plates and a saucer bounced off the washing-up rack and broke on the floor. "Bugger the bitch," said Wilt, inclusively. Eva, Judy, and Sally Pringsheim, all coming within the ambit of his fury. Then he sat down at the table and looked at the note again. Going away to think things over. Like hell she was. Think? The stupid cow wasn't capable of thought. She'd emote, drool over his deficiencies, and work herself into an ecstasy of self-pity. Wilt could hear her now, blathering on about that blasted bank manager and how she should have married him instead of saddling herself with a man who couldn't even get promotion at the Tech, and who went round fucking inflatable dolls in other people's bathrooms. There was that filthy slut Sally Pringsheim egging her on. Wilt looked at the postscript. Sally says next time you want a blowjob. Christ! As if he'd wanted the blowjob the last time. But there it was. A new myth in the making, like the business of his being in love with Betty Crabtree, when all he'd done was give her a lift home one night after an evening class. Wilt's home life was punctuated by such myths, weapons in Eva's armoury, to be brought out when the occasion demanded and brandished above his head. And now Eva had the ultimate deterrent at her disposal, a doll and Sally Pringsheim and a blowjob. The balance of recrimination, which had been sustaining factor in their relationship, had shifted dramatically. It would take an act of desperate invention on Wilt's part to restore it. Don't forget to buy some dog food. Well, at least she'd left him the car. It was standing in the carport. Wilt went out and drove round to the supermarket and bought 3 tins of dog food, a boil-in-the-bag curry, and a bottle of gin. He was going to get pissed. Then he went home and sat in the kitchen, watching Clem gulp his bonzo while the bag boiled. He poured himself a stiff gin, topped it up with lime, and wandered about. And all the time, he was conscious of the package lying there on the draining board, waiting for him to open it. And inevitably, he would open it, out of sheer curiosity. He knew it, and they knew it, wherever they were. And on Sunday night, Eva would come home, and the first thing she would do would be to ask him about the doll and if he'd had a nice time with it. Wilt helped himself to more gin and considered the doll's utility. There must be a way of using the thing to turn the tables on Eva. By the time he'd finished his second gin, he'd begun to formulate a plan. It involved the doll, a pile hole, and a nice test of his own strength of character. It was one thing to have fantasies about murdering your wife. It was quite another to put them into effect. And between the two there lay an area of uncertainty. By the end of his third gin, Wilt was determined to put the plan into effect. If it did nothing else, it was proof that he was capable of executing a murder. Wilt got up and unwrapped the doll. In his interior dialogue, Eva was telling him what would happen if Mavis Mottram got to hear about his disgusting behaviour at the Pringsheims. You'd be the laughing-stock of the neighbourhood, she said. You'd never live it down. Wouldn't he, though? Wilt smiled drunkenly to himself and went upstairs. For once, Eva was mistaken. He might not live it down, but Mrs. Eva Wilt wouldn't be around to gloat. She wouldn't live at all. Upstairs in the bedroom, he closed the curtains and laid the doll on the bed and looked for the valve which had eluded him the previous night. He found it and fetched a foot pump from the garage. 5 minutes later, Judy was in good shape. She lay on the bed and smiled up at him. Wilt half closed his eyes and squinted at her. In the half-darkness, he had to admit that she was hideously lifelike. Plastic Eva with the mastic boobs. All that remained was to dress it up. He rummaged around in several drawers in search of a bra and blouse, decided she didn't need a bra, and picked out an old skirt and a pair of tights. In a cardboard box in the wardrobe, he found one of Eva's wigs. She'd had a phase of wigs. Finally, a pair of shoes. By the time he'd finished, Eva Wilt's replica lay on the bed, smiling fixedly at the ceiling. "That's my girl," said Wilt, and went down to the kitchen to see how the boil in the bag was coming along. It was burnt in the bag. Wilt turned the stove off and went into the lavatory under the stairs and sat thinking about his next move. He would use the doll for dummy runs, so that if and when it came to the day, he would be accustomed to the whole process of murder and would act without feeling like an automaton, killing by conditioned reflex, murder by habit. Then again, he would know how to time the whole affair, and Eva's going off with the Pringsheims for the weekend would help too. It would establish a pattern of sudden disappearances. He would provoke her somehow to do it again and again and again. And then the visit to the doctor. It's just that I can't sleep, Doctor. My wife keeps on going off and leaving me, and I just can't get used to sleeping on my own. A prescription for sleeping tablets. Then, on the night, I'll make the Ovaltine tonight, dear. You look tired. I'll bring it up to you in bed. Gratitude followed by snores. Down to the car, fairly early would be best, around 10:30. Over to the tech and down the hole. Perhaps inside a plastic bag. No, not a plastic bag. I understand you brought a large plastic bag recently, sir. I wonder if you'd mind showing it to us. No, better just to leave her down the hole they were going to fill with concrete next morning. And finally, a bewildered Wilt. He would go round to the Pringsheims. Where's Eva? Oh, yes, you do. No, we don't. Don't lie to me. She's always coming round here. Or we're not lying. We haven't seen her. After that, he would go to the police. Motiveless, clueless, and undiscoverable. And proof that he was a man who could act. Or wasn't. What if he broke down under the strain and confessed? That'd be some sort of vindication, too. He would know what sort of man he was one way or another, and at least he would have acted for once in his life. And 15 years in prison would be almost identical to 15, more, 20 years at the tech, confronting louts who despised him and talked about Piggy and the Lord of the Flies. Besides, he could always plead the book as mitigating circumstances in his trial. Millard, members of the jury, I ask you to put yourself in the defendant's place. For 12 years he has been confronted by the appalling prospect of reading this dreadful book to classes of bored and hostile youths. He has had to endure agonies of repetition, of nausea and disgust at Mr. Golding's revoltingly romantic view of human nature. Ah, but I hear you say that Mr. Golding is not a romantic, that his view of human nature as expressed in his portrait of a group of young boys marooned on a desert island is the very opposite of romanticism, and that the sentimentality of which I accuse him, and to which my client's appearance in this court attests, is to be found not in The Lord of the Flies, but in its predecessor, Coral Island. But, my lad, gentlemen of the jury, there is such a thing as inverted romanticism, the romanticism of disillusionment, of pessimism, and of nihilism.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the other side of this cassette. Side 4.
Let us suppose for one moment that my client had spent 12 years reading not Mr. Golding's work, but Coral Island to groups of apprentices. Is it reasonable to imagine that he would have been driven to the desperate remedy of murdering his wife? No, 100 times no. Mr. Ballantyne's book would have given him the inspiration, the self-discipline, the optimism, and the belief in man's ability to rescue himself from the most desperate situation by his own ingenuity. No, it might not be such a good idea to pursue that line of argument too far. The defendant, Wilt, had, after all, exercised a good deal of ingenuity in rescuing himself from a desperate situation. Still, it was a nice thought. Wilt finished his business in the lavatory and looked round for the toilet paper. There wasn't any. The bloody roll had run out. He reached in his pocket and found Eva's note, and put it to good use. Then he flushed it down the U-bend, puffed some Harpic after it to express his opinion of it and her, and went out to the kitchen and helped himself to another gin. He spent the rest of the evening sitting in front of the TV with a piece of bread and cheese and a tin of peaches until it was time to try his first dummy run. He went out to the front door and looked up and down the street. It was almost dark now, and there was no one in sight. Leaving the front door open, he went upstairs and fetched the doll and put it in the back seat of the car. He had to push and squeeze a bit to get it in, but finally the door shut. Wilt climbed in and backed the car out into Parkview Avenue and drove down to the roundabout. By the time he reached the car park at the back of the Tech, it was exactly 10:30. He stopped and sat in the car, looking round. Not a soul in sight, and no lights on. There wouldn't be. The Tech closed at 9. 6. Sally lay naked on the deck of the cabin cruiser, her tight breasts pointing to the sky and her legs apart. Beside her, Eva lay on her stomach and looked downriver. "Oh, God, this is divine," Sally murmured. "I have this deep thing about the countryside." "You've got this deep thing, period," said Gaskell, steering the cruiser erratically towards a lock. He was wearing a captain's cap and sunglasses. "Cliché, baby," said Sally. "We're coming to a lock," said Eva anxiously. "There are some men there." "Men? Oh, forget men, darling. There's just you and me and G, and G's not a man, are you, G, baby?" "I have my moments," said Gaskell. "But so seldom, so awfully seldom," Sally said. "Anyway, what does it matter? We're here, idyllic style, cruising down the river in the good old summer time." "Shouldn't we have cleared the house up before we left?" Eva asked. "The secret of parties is not to clear up afterward, but to clear off. We can do all that when we get back."